Serious, non-religious people, who are anti-abortion, why? Attention. Serious. Tag notice, jokes, puns, and off-topic comments are not permitted, in any comment, parent or child. Parent comments that aren't from the target group will be removed, along with their child replies. Report comments that violate these rules. Posts that have few relevant answers within the first hour, and posts that are not appropriate for the serious tag will be removed. Consider doing an AMA request instead. Thanks for your cooperation and enjoy the discussion. I am a bot, and this action was performed automatically. Please contact the moderators of this subreddit, message, compose, to =r, AskReddit, if you have any questions or concerns. I am not religious. I am morally against abortions, for non-medical reasons, because I believe it's a tragedy. It's a life that could have been and has been snuffed out before it ever had a chance. If it's deemed medically necessary to preserve the life of the mother, then that is different. I am legally pro-choice because I don't believe someone has a right to the body of someone else, even if they need that body in order to survive. It is perfectly acceptable to have a moral opinion and a legal opinion that are in opposition to each other. It simply means you understand that your morality should not dictate what other people can and cannot do. This is something that I feel has been largely lost from public discourse. The ability to have nuance. To say, I don't like X, but I understand that my personal views do not, and should not, constitute laws. Instead, we need to look at the deeper issues and decide if a law is truly necessary, or if it should be left to the individual. In almost all cases, I believe issues should be left to the individual. This was honestly eye-opening to read. I feel this is the best answer here. Christopher Hitchens, the atheist writer, supported abortions only on practical terms. He wasn't a fan of them morally. Reason being that a fetus still has the potential for personhood. This does not give them the same or overriding rights over the mother, but it still grants them some moral value, which some on the pro-choice camp seems to wholly deny. I challenge you to find any pro-choice person that would say they are a fan of abortions morally. I would take that challenge. I would point to unironic eugenists, for example, both historical and current. I could point out the people who still use the dodgy statistics linking abortion and reduced levels of crime from the Freakonomics book. And there are those who might not be fans, but talk and treat abortions as purely neutral things. Greater than I would point to unironic eugenists, for example, both historical and current. Wasn't the concept of Planned Parenthood pioneered by a white woman who thought black people were literally incapable of raising children, so she preferred they abort them instead because that was somehow kinder? Margaret Sanger is who you're talking about, and that's a pretty toned-down version of some of the more radical stuff she believed as she got older. I know not that many people will see this because the post is pretty old, but I want to get this off my mind. I also want to preface that I'm very pro-choice. It's so crazy to me that both sides pretend to not understand the other, and try to make it a religious debate or something like that. To me, the actual argument is so goddamn simple. I'll explain. I hope both sides would agree that abortion should not be allowed post-birth. Why is that? Because it's just straight-up murder. That was a person and you killed it. So, when did it become a person? It's a hard thing to pinpoint, so people have differing opinions. But, you don't have to be a religious person to have the belief that there are some abortions that should be considered murder. People who are pro-life generally just believe that the fetus is alive, and killing it is murder. Doesn't need to be grounded in religion. People who are pro-choice either believe that the rights of the mother outweigh the rights of the fetus, or do not believe that the fetus is alive enough to have rights. Please someone let me know if any of this doesn't make sense. I think your point of view makes sense. Me personally, I support abortion rights until the fetus is viable. Once you hit that viability threshold, around 24 to 26 weeks, then I have no issues with restrictions. While I think there should always be exceptions made for medical complications regardless of the stage of the pregnancy, the idea of someone deciding at 30 weeks, nah, I don't want this anymore, that doesn't quite fly with me. But if we're going to be honest, something like that hardly ever happens. So that's my threshold, the point where the fetus has a reasonable chance of living outside the womb. The problem with the viability argument is that it is not consistent. A premature fetus is viable in a first-world hospital with state-of-the-art NICU facilities, but a premature fetus in rural Eritrea is not viable, despite being at the same stage of pregnancy. Life cannot be defined by the specific circumstances it is in. It needs to be something more fundamental, more intrinsic. Conception, heartbeat, sustained brain activity are candidates, but the only one of those that is required by every human being to have ever existed is conception. It's possible to live without a heartbeat, we have the technology for that. Comatose patients can have massively reduced brain activity, but they're still alive. Using either heartbeat or brain activity as the marker for life will exclude some clearly living people, so they're not possible candidates in my opinion. Bill Burr said it perfectly tbh, not a cake yet. Well, it would have been if you didn't do what you just did. But when does it become a cake? You wouldn't sing happy birthday around a bowl of batter with icing on it. Yeah, that's actually the hardest part of the discussion. If we could pinpoint when it's alive or when does life start, then we would probably all be on the same page. Edit. I am getting a lot of responses and this is, surprisingly, turning into an interesting conversation. Sorry if answer late. Mods. Why not just close the thread, if you are going to delete the only legitimate answer given in this thread? What was it? Copy plus pasted, you, Acacia's response. Fucking all these comments are not answering the question, so allow me. I am decidedly pro-choice, but we had this debate in my bioethics class and there were a lot of people in it who were anti-abortion. Some were both anti-abortion and not religious whatsoever, so I'm gonna do my best to steelman the 3 best arguments they gave me. I'll go from the answer most commonly given to least commonly given, and I'll do that below, and #X200B. 1. If they can be a person, then they are a person, and all people deserve some amount of rights and respect. The argument basically is that even if right now all you have is a ball of cells, that ball of cells is one day going to be a person. That person will have thoughts and feelings, and it's wrong to deprive them of that potentiality just due to inconvenience. There actually wasn't anyone in the class who argued anti-abortion when the pregnancy put the mother's health at risk, so I do mean inconvenience, which in class we defined as basically anything less than straight up killing or disfiguring the mother if she carries to term. There's a bit more to it than just that. This point tended to overlap in our discussion with pro-Earth movements, that we intentionally do something that makes life now a bit more inconvenient to make the lives of descendants we'll never know better, but in my opinion that scales out kind of weird when you go out past the individual mother, so I can't explain it in more detail than that. I just figured I'd mention it since it did come up a lot. 2. It's ableistic or eugenistic. This argument is basically against aborting babies with non-life-threatening disabilities, that just because they'd be born with a life that's more difficult, maybe even much more difficult, than another person, that doesn't mean they're worth any less than any other person. They still deserve to have their basic rights guaranteed, and survival should be one of those rights, and thus, they deserve to be allowed to exist, and it should not be allowed to choose against their existence even at the individual level. 3. We're wired against it. Now I want to give a caveat here that even in class 1 called BS, I'm not convinced that the science is so clear. I think it's more due to societal stigmas, but it was the 3rd most common argument, so here we go. Women who get abortions tend to get super fucking depressed afterwards. The argument states that this is because something in their brain is wired to want to protect and raise the baby, or basically it states that the material instinct kicks in basically at baby's conception. The argument states that something in us is wired to view the act of eliminating a fetus in a similar ethical window to eliminating an already alive person because something in us sees them as people who just aren't here yet but are equally people, and thus for the mother's mental health it is best to make them carry to term, unless they're physically unable or endangered by it, because if we let them abort then they'll inevitably have a lifetime of sorrows ahead. Again, I'm not crazy about this one. I think the stress of going through the whole abortion process in this country along with the legality and the fact that you get traumatized and guilt-tripped to hell both before and after the procedure is what causes it, but that's the 3rd argument. Final note. Y'all gotta quit answering these types of questions with simply saying, I'm pro-choice, or, well, both sides make some good points. That's not an answer to the question for the first one, and it's not even a genuine opinion for the second. I hate the term virtue signaling, but that is exactly what you're doing when you have nothing to contribute other than something that makes you look good. The second isn't even an opinion, it's just saying you're abstaining from debate. That could be because you're uneducated or because you genuinely can't pick a side. It really doesn't matter, and ultimately if there is a debate to be had you aren't contributing anything by saying that. For the rest of you, I hope this helps. I personally am still decidedly pro-choice, but I think some of the points are decent. I think it's a difference in philosophy on where you think personhood begins, but I won't get too much into my opinion since it's not the question. Peace. I reckon for the same reason as religious people? As in they consider it a murder. Not true if you're a Muslim. I have said it earlier in this post so I'm copy-pasting it here. I'm religious and as a Muslim person, my religion allows abortion but only if it's done early, in first 3 months. Because it's considered as when the child reaches 90 days then the soul is breathed into their body. I'm not religious but my religious grandparents say that Jews must be pro-choice because the mother of the life is paramount in Judaism and some other religious stuff I don't really understand. I don't believe in God, and I would never have an abortion. I don't care if you do though. I 100% see it as destroying a human life, but I also think it's your choice. If you can live with that on your conscience then that's great. I could not, so I will not. Edit. I'm not going to reply to any more of these comments. At first it was a nice intriguing conversation, but now the weirdos have come out and all of a sudden I'm pro-rape, pro-murder, don't care about humanity, I hate waffles, whatever. You're not going to make me choose a side, I'm not going to fight on anyone's behalf, but y'all have fun arguing amongst yourselves. The analogy behind, I consider it this, that's out of my moral virtue, I won't do it, but I know others people won't care and so it's their own issue, is a genuine, good answer here. I'm 100% behind the ideology of not fucking with others if it doesn't harm me or someone I love, and if that's not against my own morality value. I'm the kind of guy that save insects stuck in my room because I don't have the guts to harm them, but I also know there is people whose job is to kill animals. I won't go against them because if they can live with it, it's clearly not my problem. Is there no middle ground for opinion? Do you have to be either pro or anti? Does it have to be us, them? I don't like that, I don't accept that. People on both sides have good points. Myself, I'm strongly with the freedom to choose for yourself and strongly against the normalization of the practice so people get so comfortable with it they behave extra recklessly as they do with everything else. I wouldn't ever want to see this tweet. Preggers, we didn't have condoms, lol, oops. Reply. Oh no big deal, just get an abortion, you can get one everywhere and they are practically free. And I wouldn't want to see them over time with it legal talking about later stage like up to the point of birth or worse. Some politician said, safe, legal, rare. That's where I'd be on it. It needs to be available, safe medically, safe from being assaulted by people at the building or that fake abortion clinic shit where the girl gets trapped in a room and guilt-tripped from an organization pretending to be what she is looking for, that exists BTW. But rare in the sense that society never treats it so casually like it's a fucking shopping trip. My main secular point against abortion is that it, essentially, determines personhood based on if the mother wants the child to be born. That makes the value of human life dependent on opinion, which is a very dangerous road to go down. Do you have an issue with extra IVF embryos being destroyed? I'd prefer the destruction to happen passively instead of actively, but since those embryos would require an external actor to gain viability in the first place, I wouldn't consider that ending a life. It's more akin to not taking all steps necessary to create life, which any reasonable person would likely agree is perfectly moral. So we are still determining personhood by the desirability of the embryo. Taking action and not taking action are two completely different things. You must take action in order for an abortion to happen. If left to naturally occurring devices, a pregnancy will result in a child in the large majority of cases. Where an IVF embryo would not result in a child if specific steps are not taken. And #X200B. This means that both morally and scientifically these two things are not at all similar. You are trying to draw false equivalencies as a gotcha, but with a little bit of thinking, it doesn't make sense. I don't think there is a harder topic out there. And #X200B. 1. Yes, I feel women should have the right to their body and choose what is good for them. 2. No, I don't feel someone should have the ability to end a life prematurely in the fetus. Both contradict for me, and I think a lot of people just teeter from side to side, like I do. Ultimately, I tend to sway towards the woman's choice, just because of so much, but it's hard to not feel for the life that could have been. And #X200B, it's a very hard topic.